Welcome to Infidelity Diaries. Explore the secrets and stories of infidelity with us. When I first met him, my life had long been at a standstill. The familiar routine seemed unbearable, and my heart craved something more, something that would make me feel alive again. And then he appeared, the man who turned my world upside down. The story I am about to tell you is full of unexpected twists, passion, and actions that could destroy everything I knew before. I never thought I was capable of such deeds, but life sometimes brings surprises. Let me take you on this unforgettable journey, full of love, passion, and inevitable consequences. The hum of the coffee machine was a monotonous background to my thoughts. The morning sun lit up the kitchen, creating an illusion of peace and coziness. But inside, everything was boiling. I, Sarah Jenkins, a 40-year-old woman with an outwardly perfect life, felt trapped in a golden cage. My husband, Robert, was a successful lawyer. He was always busy, immersed in work, leaving me alone in our spacious suburban home in Boston. This time, I heard not only the sounds of the coffee machine, but also footsteps on the path. Our new housekeeper, Alex, had just started working. He was a young man with a captivating smile and unruly blonde hair. His appearance was a stark contrast to our previous elderly worker, who spent more time complaining about his health than performing his duties. "Good morning, Mrs. Jenkins," Alex greeted me, his voice deep and pleasant. I couldn't help but notice how his eyes sparkled at the sight of me. "Good morning, Alex," I replied, trying to hide my excitement. "How are you?" "Great, thank you," he said, smiling slightly. "I've already finished with the lawn. Everything looks wonderful." I nodded and returned to my tasks, but thoughts of him lingered. His presence evoked a strange feeling in me, a mix of anxiety and excitement. It was a new and unexpected sensation that I hadn't felt in years. Over the next few weeks, I found more and more reasons to go outside and talk to Alex. Our conversations grew longer and deeper. He talked about his hobbies, the travels he dreamed of, and how much he enjoyed working outdoors. I found myself listening to him with an interest I had long lost in conversations with Robert. One day, when I went out to the backyard, Alex was standing by the rose bed, carefully trimming the bushes. I walked closer and asked, "Is something wrong with the roses?" He looked up and smiled. "No, Mrs. Jenkins, they just need a little care," he replied, his voice soft and confident. "Do you like roses?" I nodded and sat down next to him. Our hands accidentally touched, and that fleeting contact sent an indescribable wave of emotions through me. Alex held my gaze a little longer than necessary. "You know, Sarah," he said quietly, "I like working here. You're an amazing woman." I felt the blood rush to my cheeks. His words and gaze left me in a state of confusion and excitement. "Thank you, Alex," I whispered, trying to hide my embarrassment. With each passing day, our communication became more personal and intimate. I found myself thinking about him more and more, about his smile, about how tenderly he cared for the garden. It was a new and thrilling feeling that made my heart beat faster. But with this feeling came a sense of guilt. Robert was a good husband, caring and reliable, but his constant absence and immersion in work left me feeling lonely and forgotten. Alex, on the other hand, was attentive and gentle, seeing me in a way I hadn't felt in a long time, desired and important. One day, when Robert was working late, I went out to the garden again. Alex was working on another project, and I approached him, trying not to show my excitement. "How's the work going?" I asked, watching his movements. "Everything's great," he replied, smiling. "But I think these roses need some extra care." "Maybe you could show me how to take proper care of them," I suggested, feeling my heart start to race. He nodded and invited me to sit next to him. We leaned over the bushes, and our hands accidentally touched again. But this time, I didn't pull away. We both froze for a moment, our eyes meeting, and in that instant, I felt the world around us disappear. Alex slowly moved closer, his breath warm and unsteady. I could no longer resist this attraction. Our lips met in a passionate kiss that ignited a fire within me that I hadn't felt in years. That kiss was the beginning of something new, forbidden and exciting. The unknown lay ahead, but at that moment, I was ready to risk everything to feel alive again. Morning came too quickly, leaving me in turmoil. Memories of yesterday's kiss lingered, making my heart race every time I thought about it. I tried to go about my day as usual, but the inner tension was impossible to ignore. Robert left for work early, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I knew Alex would come to the garden today, and the thought drove me crazy. I stepped out into the backyard, hoping to calm my nerves with the fresh air. Alex was already there, busy watering the flowers. When he saw me, he smiled, and my heart fluttered once more. "Good morning, Sarah," he greeted, his voice as warm and deep as it had been the day before. "Good morning, Alex," I replied, trying to conceal my excitement. "How are things going?" "Great, thank you," he said, setting the hose aside. "How are you?" I felt my face start to flush. "Not bad," I managed to say, trying to keep calm. "You left early yesterday." "Yes," he replied, his gaze full of understanding. "I thought it best to leave you alone." I stepped closer, unable to resist the pull I felt toward him. "Thank you for understanding," I said quietly, looking into his eyes. "But I don't want you to feel uncomfortable." He leaned in closer, his breath warm on my skin. "I feel perfectly fine," he whispered. "But if it makes you feel better, I can leave." I quickly shook my head, realizing I didn't want him to go. "No, please stay," I said, feeling my heart race wildly. "I enjoy your company." He smiled, a smile full of tenderness. "I'm glad you do," he said, his voice soft and soothing. "But if you ever feel uncomfortable, I can always leave." I knew I had to be honest with him and myself. "Alex," I began, feeling the words catch in my throat. "What happened yesterday? It was wrong, but I can't ignore it." He nodded, his gaze full of understanding. "I understand, Sarah," he said. "We both know it's wrong, but that doesn't make our feelings any less real." We stood in silence, realizing that our feelings for each other went beyond a simple infatuation. It was something more, something that couldn't just be forgotten or ignored. In the following days, our meetings became more frequent. We found moments to be together, even if it was just sitting silently next to each other. Every look, every touch was filled with meaning, making our feelings even stronger. One evening, when Robert was working late, I went out to the garden again. Alex was waiting for me, his eyes sparkling in the light of the setting sun. I walked up to him, and he took my hand. "Sarah," he began, his voice full of emotion. "I know this is difficult, but I can't hide my feelings any longer." I looked at him, feeling my heart overflow with emotions. "I can't either," I admitted. "I don't know what to do about it, but I can't ignore it." He pulled me closer, and our lips met in a passionate kiss. This kiss was even more intense than the first, igniting a fire within me that I couldn't extinguish. We pulled away from each other, both breathing heavily. "We need to be careful," he said, his voice hoarse. "We can't let this destroy our lives." I nodded, knowing he was right. "Yes, but I can't live without these feelings anymore," I whispered. "I need this. I need you." We stood, holding each other in the quiet of the garden, realizing that a difficult path lay ahead of us. But at that moment, I was ready to risk everything for these feelings, for this passion that I hadn't felt in years. Robert left for work early in the morning, as usual, leaving me alone in our spacious house. The day promised to be hot, and I decided to spend it by the pool, hoping it would help distract me from thoughts about recent events. Opening the wardrobe, I took out my favorite swimsuit, a dark blue one with a deep neckline that accentuated my figure. Putting it on, I looked in the mirror and was pleased with the result. The last time I felt this attractive was many years ago. I stepped into the backyard, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin. The pool, surrounded by greenery and flowers, looked like an oasis in the desert. I descended the steps and immersed myself in the cool water, enjoying the pleasant contrast. The water caressed my body, washing away my anxiety and tension. A few minutes passed, and I heard footsteps. Turning my head, I saw Alex. He froze for a moment, his eyes widening in surprise and admiration. "Sarah," he said, his voice trembling, You look stunning." I felt my heart start to race and smiled at him. "Thank you, Alex," I replied, trying to hide my embarrassment. Would you like to join me? He hesitated for a moment, then nodded and, taking off his shirt, joined me in the pool. I couldn't help but notice how attractive he was, his muscular body, tanned skin. We swam close to each other, enjoying the cool water and the silence of the surrounding nature. This is so nice, Alex said, his voice soft and soothing. I can't remember the last time I felt so relaxed. Yes, it really is wonderful, I replied, feeling my tension gradually fade away. Sometimes you just need to stop and enjoy the moment. We continued swimming, our bodies occasionally brushing against each other, and I felt the tension between us build. Finally, I couldn't take it any longer and moved closer to him. Our eyes met, and I felt a fire ignite within me. Sarah, Alex whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion. I can't hide it anymore. I want you. His words ignited a passion in me that I could no longer suppress. I moved closer, our lips meeting in a passionate kiss. It was more than just a kiss. It was something that ignited a fire within me. Alex began touching me, his hands gentle and confident. He ran his hands over my shoulders, then down my back, and finally reached the clasp of my swimsuit. I felt him start to undo it, and my body responded to him instinctively. I couldn't resist this attraction any longer. Sarah, you're so beautiful, he whispered, his voice full of admiration and desire. I responded with a kiss, our bodies merging into one. The water around us seemed warmer, as if sharing in our passion. Alex continued to caress me, his hands everywhere, on my hips, on my breasts, on my neck. I felt waves of pleasure wash over me. Our movements became more intense. We forgot about everything around us, immersed in our world of passion and pleasure. Alex began to move inside me, and I felt waves of pleasure wash over me again and again. We forgot about everything except this moment, except our feelings for each other. Every movement was filled with passion and tenderness. We moved in sync, as if dancing, and I felt waves of pleasure wash over me again and again. We forgot about everything except this moment, except our feelings for each other. When it was all over, we remained in each other's arms, breathing heavily. I felt my heart beating in unison with his, and realized that this moment had changed everything. We knew difficult times lay ahead, but at that moment, we were happy, and that was what mattered. The next few days after our heated and passionate encounter in the pool flew by in a haze. Every morning, I woke up with thoughts of our kiss and how his hands glided over my body. It was difficult to focus on daily tasks, and when I saw Alex, my feelings only intensified. Robert, as always, was immersed in his work. He came home late, tired and irritable. We hardly spoke, and this silence had become customary for me. However, I began to notice that he was more attentive to me. Perhaps he sensed that something had changed. One evening, when Robert was working late again, I decided to take a walk in the garden. The night air was cool and fresh, helping to calm me a little. I stepped into the backyard and saw Alex, who, as always, was busy with work. "Hi, Alex," I greeted, trying to hide my nervousness. "Hi, Sarah," he replied, his eyes glowing in the moonlight. "How are you?" "A bit nervous," I admitted, unable to conceal my feelings. "I can't stop thinking about what happened between us." He came closer and took my hand. "Me too," he said quietly. "But we have to be careful. If Robert finds out, it could ruin everything." I nodded, understanding he was right. But my feelings for him were too strong to simply forget. "I know," I whispered. "But it's hard to control. I feel alive when I'm with you." He leaned in and kissed me. The kiss was soft and gentle, yet full of passion. I felt my heart race again, and allowed myself to forget everything for a moment. We stood in each other's arms, enjoying the moment, when we suddenly heard the sound of the door opening. I quickly pulled away from Alex and saw Robert stepping into the backyard. "Sarah, what are you doing out here?" he asked, his voice full of surprise. "I just needed some fresh air," I replied, trying to hide my nervousness. "Why are you home so early?" "My meetings were canceled," he said, his gaze shifting to Alex. "Good evening, Alex." "Good evening, Mr. Jenkins," Alex replied, his voice calm, but I could see the tension in him. Robert walked over to me and put his arm around my shoulders. "Sarah, you look tired," he said, his voice full of concern. "Maybe we should go inside and rest?" I nodded, feeling the tension rise. "Yes, of course," I replied, trying to remain calm. "Thank you, Alex, for your help in the garden." We headed into the house, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest. Robert didn't say anything suspicious, but I sensed that he had noticed something was off. I realized that our secret meetings with Alex could be discovered at any moment, adding adrenaline to our relationship. That evening, when Robert fell asleep, I lay in bed, thinking about what had happened. I knew our meetings with Alex were risky, but I couldn't stop. He had ignited a fire in me that I couldn't extinguish, and the feeling was too strong to simply forget. The next day, I decided to meet with Alex to discuss our next steps. We had to be careful not to ruin our lives. I didn't want to lose Robert, but at the same time, I couldn't forget my feelings for Alex. When I stepped into the yard, Alex was already waiting for me. We sat on the bench and began discussing our next steps. "Sarah, we need to be very careful," he began, his voice serious. "We can't afford any mistakes." "I know," I replied, feeling my heart ache. "But I can't just forget what I feel for you." "I can't either," he admitted. "But we need to find a way to be together without destroying everything around us." We continued discussing our plans, trying to find a solution that would work for both of us. It wasn't easy, but I was ready to fight for our feelings. After all, life is full of surprises, and sometimes you have to take risks to find true happiness. In the weeks that followed, our meetings with Alex became increasingly risky. We sought moments when we could be together, and every time our bodies merged in passionate embraces, I felt my life changing. A fire burned inside me that I couldn't extinguish. One evening, when Robert was working late, I decided to spend time with Alex by the pool. I put on the same swimsuit that had so captivated him the last time and eagerly awaited our meeting. When he arrived, his eyes lit up with admiration once again. "Sarah, you look stunning," he said, his voice full of passion. "Thank you, Alex," I replied, feeling my heart start to race. "Shall we swim?" He nodded, and we slipped into the water together. The cool water embraced our bodies, but the tension between us was almost palpable. We swam close to each other, enjoying the moment of silence and peace. "You know, I think about you all the time," he confessed, his voice barely audible above the sound of the water. "I do too," I admitted, unable to hide my feelings. "It's crazy, but I can't stop." We moved closer to each other, and I felt his warm breath on my skin. Our lips met in a passionate kiss, and I lost all control. His hands began to roam my body, gently touching every inch of my skin. I felt his fingers cautiously slip under my swimsuit, and a wave of pleasure washed over me. "Sarah, you're so beautiful," he whispered, his voice hoarse with desire. I responded with a kiss, our bodies merging into one. We forgot about everything except our attraction to each other. I felt waves of pleasure wash over me again and again, each of his movements filled with passion and tenderness. Suddenly, I heard the sound of the door opening. My eyes snapped open, and I saw Robert standing at the threshold. His face was contorted with a mix of shock and rage. "What is going on here?" he shouted, his voice filled with anger. I pulled away from Alex, feeling a cold wave of terror engulf me. Robert stormed toward the pool, his eyes darting between me and Alex. "Robert, it's not what you think," I began, but the words stuck in my throat. "Not what I think?" His voice trembled with fury. "I see everything with my own eyes, Sarah. How could you?" Alex rose from the water, his face full of regret. "Mr. Jenkins, please, listen to me," he began, but Robert cut him off. "Listen to you?" Robert snarled. "I trusted you, and you betrayed me." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I couldn't look at my husband, knowing I had caused him such pain. "Robert, please, let's talk," I tried, but he had already turned away from me. "We have nothing more to talk about," he said, his voice full of bitterness. "I'm leaving." He headed toward the house, and I realized that our life would never be the same. I watched him go, and my heart broke with pain and regret. Alex came up to me and put his arms around my shoulders. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," he whispered. "I didn't want it to end like this." "It's not your fault," I replied, feeling tears streaming down my cheeks. We knew what we were getting into. We stood by the pool, lost in our thoughts. I knew our actions had consequences, but I wasn't prepared for this kind of pain. We stood in silence, realizing that our lives had changed forever. Robert left that same evening, leaving me alone in our enormous house. I watched as he packed his things, his face a mask of bitterness and pain. My attempts to talk to him were met with a wall of silence. He didn't want to listen, didn't want to understand. When the door closed behind him, I realized our marriage was over. A few days passed, filled with emptiness and loneliness. I hoped Alex would come and support me. His kisses, his touch had ignited a fire within me, and I believed he wouldn't leave me alone in this difficult moment. One morning, as I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, Alex knocked on the door. My heart leaped with joy, and I quickly opened it for him. "Alex, thank you for coming," I said, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. "I need to talk to you." He stepped inside, his face serious. "Sarah, I came to tell you something important," he began, avoiding my gaze. "I know it's difficult, but we can get through this together," I said, trying to keep hope in my voice. "Sarah, I can't continue this anymore," he said, his voice cold. "I'm not looking for a serious relationship. This was just a fling, and I don't want you to have any false hopes." I felt the world crumble beneath me. His words were like a knife to my heart. "How can you say that?" I whispered, feeling tears stream down my cheeks. "I thought there was something between us." "Sarah, I never promised you anything," he said, his eyes full of regret. "It was fun, but I don't want to tie my life to anyone else. I'm sorry." He turned and headed for the door. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Everything that had seemed so important and real suddenly felt like an illusion. When the door closed behind him, I was left alone, lost and broken. Days went by, and I tried to make sense of what had happened. Robert didn't answer my calls, and his lawyer sent me divorce papers. Alex disappeared from my life as suddenly as he had appeared. I was left alone in our big house, surrounded by memories and pain. Every morning I woke up with a sense of emptiness. I could no longer find solace in the garden, where everything reminded me of my meetings with Alex. My feelings for him had been real, but now I understood that it was just a fleeting infatuation for him. One evening, sitting by the window and watching the sunset, I realized I needed to move on. I couldn't keep living in the past, in pain and disappointment. I had to find the strength to continue living despite everything.